All right, so I'm finally all settled in. After moving boxes back and forth and spending hours rearranging the garage, finally I got everything set up, started using some chemicals, then started developing film, and then had to move boxes back and forth again. Well, and this goes over here. Nope, I was wrong. Goes over here. We won't get into that. And then finally started scanning my negatives. And it was at that point that I thought to myself, are my DSLR scans any better than a lab's? So hello everybody, welcome back. If you're new, make sure you hit the subscribe button, like this video if you find it useful, and now let's get into today's topic. Quick note though, we have hit the 9K subscriber mark, which means I am giving away to one of those cameras from the previous video. I will link that up here if you have not already watched it. There are still 2 more that I'm giving away, so you'll still have a chance, but I will be announcing the winner for one of those at the end of this video. Now, lab scans versus DSLR scanning. So I go back and forth between developing my own film and sending it off to labs, and it depends on what my workload is, how much film I have to develop, and all that kind of stuff. If I have a pile of film sitting there waiting to be developed, usually I'll buy the chemicals and I'll develop and scan and all that stuff myself because it's more cost effective. However, if I only have a couple rolls that I've shot and I don't plan on shooting any in the next week or 2, rather than go buy chemicals that will sit and go bad potentially, I'll just send those couple of rolls off to the lab, have them develop, scan them, all that, and then if I need to, I can always go back and DSLR scan the negatives later. Now, some of you might be thinking right off the bat, well, of course your DSLR scans with a new mirrorless camera are going to be better than those of a lab that's scanning using a flatbed or a Noritsu or a Frontier, which theoretically yes, but also no. A 35mm negative or even a 120 negative or anything like that, there's only so much information in that negative. So for example, if I took 30 separate photos of that at very small squares, stitched them all together to make one 35mm negative, I wouldn't get any more detail in that than I would taking a single shot off of a full frame or crop sensor camera. Maybe slightly, but not significant enough to know, because there's only so much information on that 35mm negative. And I can't pull more information out of that if there is no more information there to pull out. So then it becomes a matter of, well, how much information you're getting from your lab scans versus how much more information you could get from DSLR scanning. So now with 35mm film, that's gonna be less noticeable than with medium format negatives, where you can get a lot more information out of that. Also, you have the look and feel of film. You want it to be a little less sharp, a little more natural. You want the colors to be a little more faded, subdued. There's just a different look with film. So DSLR scanning might give you a result that you don't necessarily want. But again, it is very nice to fix mistakes, like I talked about in the previous video. If you have a high-res DSLR scan, you can correct some things that go wrong, whereas with a TIFF or just a flatbed scan or something, you're not gonna have as much capabilities to kind of fix those errors without causing other errors or making it look kind of crummy. So to test this out, I went through a bunch of my negatives from the past years and years and years, and I used 3 separate labs for all of these negatives. One was a place I shipped it off to get them developed. It's a good lab, very big lab. Another one was a very local place, which was awful and I won't use again. Some of their scans were fine. And then there's another one that's a little bit further down the road that I use currently whenever I need to get film developed. It's quick turnaround, they do great results. But so 3 very different labs with different methods and different scanning processes, I'm sure. Now there's gonna be low-res scans, there's some decent scans, and then there are also some high-res scans that I paid for. I can't remember 100% which ones are which, so this will be kind of a good experiment. Now, I've already scanned these images, I've pulled the negatives, spent time looking through, trying to find them. I picked images that I think I can improve upon, images I want to see if I can improve upon because I really like how they look already, and then also some ones, you know, black and white, as well as portraits, landscapes, just kind of a variety. I picked 9 different images, I believe, to kind of base this test on to see what I can do with it and what results we get. So I've scanned them, I'm gonna go ahead and edit them. I'm not gonna look at the original scans that I got from the labs. Yes, I know roughly what they look like. I'm not going to look at them while I edit. Reason being is I don't want that to influence how I edit them. So I put my negatives through Negative Lab Pro, and that's how I get my baseline to start with, and then I'll tweak little things here and there to get the colors how I want them and things like that. But I don't want to look at the originals and kind of have that influence how I edit to match it. I want to see what I'll get compared to what a lab gets that does this dozens and hundreds of times a day. So I want to see how accurate my coloring is compared to that of a lab, and then see, of course, which one I prefer and which one you prefer, and if we can kind of spot the difference between lab scan and a DSLR scan. So I'm gonna put both of them up for each one here and see if you can spot the difference, and then I'll give you a few seconds and then I'll show you which one's which. But first, let's go ahead and edit these and see how they came out. Okay, so now what are your thoughts on lab scans versus DSLR scanning? Do you prefer the lab scans? Do you prefer the DSLR scans? Were you able to pick between the two to figure out which one was which? I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. I know there's a lot of controversy in this as far as it's too much detail, or what's the point of scanning it if you're shooting film and you're just gonna use a camera to scan the negative anyway? Why not just use the camera to take the shot in the first place? There's a lot of back and forth, and there's pros and cons, and there's reasons to everything. Okay, so future me, I've spent some more time looking at these comparisons, and I was actually kind of surprised at the results. If you look closely, you can see that yes, I got more contrast, I got more dynamic range, I was able to do more with the colors and kind of push it towards where I wanted to with those DSLR scans. But also, if you look closely, you'll see that the actual lab scans are sharper than the scans that I took myself. So I spent some more time and postponed putting out this video because I wanted to see if that was something I could correct or if it was something in my system that I'm gonna have to change. So for my scans, I use I think it's a 105 macro vintage Nikon lens. I put that on my Fuji X-T2, and that's what I use to DSLR scan my images. I put it about f8, adjust my shutter speed and ISO to make sure I have the best exposure, and that's what I put together. So after looking at these scans, I decided, okay, maybe the lens is a little bit off, or maybe I had some camera shake or something like that, or I just didn't pull focus quite right. So I went back, rescanned them again, made sure I zoomed in to check my focus. I made sure I had no camera shake whatsoever, made sure everything was set up as best it could be. I also did it again with the Fuji X-T4 just to make sure that it wasn't something with the camera as well. So I changed all that and I still had the same exact results. So then I went back and scanned again with my vintage Nikon 50mm macro lens, which on my X-T2 and X-T4 ends up being closer to an 85, which I prefer the 100mm just because kind of preference, but it makes more sense to use the 100mm as opposed to the 50, even though you probably won't see a huge difference in the scans with those two lenses. But I thought maybe if there's something with that 100mm macro lens, maybe this vintage Nikon 50mm will be closer to accurate. And again, I got the same level of sharpness. So the only result is that these vintage Nikon lenses are just not gonna be as sharp, which makes sense because vintage lenses in general are not gonna be as sharp as modern lenses, which is why people use vintage lenses to get a softer look for cinematography and photo and video and all that kind of stuff. Now, there could be a pro and con to that. If you want an image that's a little less sharp, yeah, you could go towards using these older lenses, but since you're already taking those images with a vintage lens, scanning them with a vintage lens as well means you're losing more sharpness than you already did by using the vintage lens to take the picture. So I'm not really a huge fan of that. I want a little bit more crisp, a little bit more sharpness in those negatives right out of the gate, since I've already taken the image with a vintage lens. So I was a little bit surprised by these results nonetheless, but I will be looking to kind of change my system, get a more modern lens to scan my negatives so that I get a more crisp, sharper image. And unless you start to pixel peep or really dig in closely, you're really not going to notice that lack of sharpness on your phone or anything like that. So it's not a huge deal. But for me personally, if I ever wanted to print that image or looking at it on a laptop or anything like that, I really would like that little extra bit of sharpness in my images. So I just want to kind of clarify that before we continue on. I do really like having the flexibility with DSLR scans to kind of fix those color issues that sometimes go wrong. You know, Fuji tends to lead very much towards the green, and a portrait, you know, can be a very warm yellowish tone, which those are great colors for certain shots, but then sometimes it just gets carried away depending on what your scene is. So it's nice to have that flexibility to bring it back more towards a neutral tone and not take away from the subject matter. So I kind of go back and forth. There are lab scans that I love and I use all the time, and then there's times where I really want to DSLR scan it to kind of pull some more out and get a little bit more into that image. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and announce the camera winner from one of the previous videos. There were 3 cameras that I'm giving away, and this is for the Canon T50. So again, if you follow the rules, you're entered in to win these 3 cameras. So I've typed in the keywords, I pulled up 450 different comments, I believe, that had those keywords in it, and it picked one at complete random without my knowing or input, and the winner was Tristan E, whose current favorite film camera is the Minolta SRT 201, which is a very solid camera. And I mean that because you could probably knock somebody out with it and it would still just keep on shooting perfectly fine. So Tristan E, congratulations, you won the Canon T50. I will be reaching out to you. Make sure you answer me or reach out to me via Instagram or email so I can get that shipped out to you. So I hope you found that useful. Let me know what your thoughts are on the 2 processes down below. I will be doing a much more detailed video of what my setup is for DSLR scanning here in my office, but for now, this is gonna do as far as a comparison. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.